Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the darkest corners of America's wilderness, places where the trail ends, the road bends, and the night swallows every sound. I'll be sharing a collection of true encounters and chilling legends from remote mountains, shadowed forests, and lonely backroads across the country. These aren't campfire myths. These are real experiences that linger long after the sun goes down. So grab a blanket, kill the lights, and settle in for a journey where beauty meets terror. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your own eerie stories in the comments. Now, let's begin. Story 1. The Hollow Voice at Widow's Creek. I was 17 the first time I heard it, standing alone by Widow's Creek just past sundown. That place always held a hush to it, even when birds still chirped in the canopy and the water gurgled soft beneath the pines. That evening, though, it felt different. The hush had weight, like it had soaked into the trees. My boots sank a little in the wet ground near the bank, the creek swollen from last week's rain. The air was that sharp kind of cold you only feel in early fall, when summer hasn't fully left, but autumn's already watching. I remember leaning down to check a snare I'd set for rabbits. My fingers were stiff with mud, and the light was going quickly. That's when I heard it. My name, not called out, whispered like someone leaning in close, lips nearly to my ear. The kind of whisper you feel in your jaw more than you hear. I looked up quick, my breath hanging in the air. Across the creek, where the trees knotted thick and wild, there wasn't a soul. Just water running black beneath branches that looked like bones straining out of the hillside. I stood still for a long time, told myself it was the wind slipping through pine. The air had that whistling hum sometimes. But when I turned to leave, the voice came again, closer this time, just behind me. Same soft whisper, drawn out like it had been waiting years to speak. I didn't run. I remembered what my father always said: don't run in the woods, especially not when you're afraid. Walk steady. Don't let it know it's got you. So I walked, every step slow and even, boots sucking at the wet ground. By the time I reached the dirt road, I was nearly shaking. I didn't look back, but I could feel it, like someone breathing down my neck. Warm, wet air, just for a second, then gone. I didn't say anything when I got home, just scraped my boots off on the porch and kept quiet. But it didn't stop. The next evening, when I crossed the same stretch of creek to check my lines again, I heard it before I even reached the water. Whispered again. My name. Always my name. Sometimes it came from across the creek, sometimes from the trees behind me. Never loud, never urgent, just there. Like it had all the time in the world. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was tired, maybe catching a cold, but each time it got harder. Sometimes I'd hear it when I wasn't near the creek, just walking past the old barn or feeding the goats at dusk. The whisper would curl out of the shadows, soft as breath, always steady, always familiar, though I never could place whose voice it was. I asked my uncle once, quiet-like over supper, if he'd ever heard strange things near the creek. He set down his fork, didn't answer right off, just looked past me like he was trying to remember something too far back. Finally, he said, "That land's old. Older than us. It remembers things. Some voices don't go quiet just 'cause folks stop listening." He never brought it up again. A week or so later, I tried something different. I stood down by the water's edge at dusk, where the trees lean in so close they almost touch. The voice came again, soft and sure. I didn't answer. I never could. But I stayed longer than I had before, just listening. My name, over and over, like the creek itself was speaking through teeth made of stone. At one point I whispered, "What do you want?" But it didn't reply, just kept saying my name, not louder, not angrier, just patient, the next night, I stayed away. I couldn't bring myself to go near the water, but even in bed, I swore I could hear it threading through the boards, through the trees outside, even through the silence in the house. I stuffed a blanket under the door and buried my head under the pillow, but it didn't matter. The voice wasn't coming from outside anymore. I left for school the next year and didn't come home much after. I told folks it was because I wanted to see more of the world, maybe get a job in a bigger town. But the truth was, I couldn't stand that creek anymore. Couldn't stand the woods. Couldn't stand that slow, steady voice that always knew my name. Last summer I came back for my uncle's funeral. Spent 2 nights in the house, the silence like a splinter under my skin. I walked down to Widow's Creek on the second night, just to see it again. The water was lower than I remembered. The air is still cold, even in July. I stood at the edge, boots sinking into old mud, and sure enough, the whisper came. It hadn't changed. Still soft, still patient, still mine. I didn't answer. I never have. But I think it knows I'm still listening. Story 2. The Window That Spoke My Name. I was 17 that summer, old enough to be trusted with a lantern and a trot line and the kind of silence that drags out of a valley after the heat falls off it. Not old enough to understand that silence can be a thing that teaches you. Widow's Creek ran behind our place like a black belt you couldn't unbuckle. Slow along the pines, shallow over the gravel shoal. Deep again where the bank bit in and the sycamore leaned just enough that you thought one day the creek would take it. Towards sundown the air went cold the way it does only in the mountains, damp and close, like breath on a mirror. I followed the same path every evening, my boots slick with clay, rope hitting my thigh, and I remember thinking nothing was different except the light. Then, from across the creek, where the rhododendron stood thick and shiny-leaved, a woman's voice said my name. Not called, whispered, soft and steady, like whoever carried it had been practicing on the stones in the dark and was finally ready to try it on a person. I didn't answer. I lifted the lantern and saw nothing but branches and leaves and a run of rock, slick with water. The flame made the sycamore's bark look like old skin. The air on my neck went cold, and I did what my father taught me, kept my head level and my steps even, and didn't turn to look at anything that wanted me to turn. When the path met the wagon road, the voice came again. Closer this time, my name dragged out like the last of a breath. I made it to the road with the smell of mud in my nose, and the feeling that if I turned I'd put my face in someone else's. At 17, I took that feeling home and set it down in the corner like a bucket of nails. Something heavy but ordinary. I came back the next night because chores aren't optional. The creek lay low and mean, the summer drawing it thin. Clouds stacked grey over the ridge. The whip-poor will shouted itself hoarse somewhere in the dark trees, saying only the name it had and saying it too many times. I checked the hooks by feel. When I had 3 bare lines and 1 bluegill slapping its tail in a small, resigned fury, the voice came again. It didn't sound like wind. Wind is careless, goes everywhere at once. This voice came straight, like somebody leaning over a fence to talk low. My name slid across the water and came up beside me without footsteps, as if the creek knew a shortcut, the path didn't. I didn't run, my father said. Never let the woods teach you to run. You'll look like prey when you do. I walked out slowly, counting fence posts to keep my mind in my body, and by the time I reached the bend, cold breath brushed the back of my neck as if someone had timed their lungs to mine. I told my uncle the way you tell somebody something without saying it, letting the words be a joke but the eyes not. He lived up the ridge alone with a crooked stovepipe and a cot that showed every spring through the sheet. He had a limp from falling off a logging truck in '79 and a way of pouring coffee like the cup would never be full enough to do the job. "The land remembers," he said, not looking at me, like it was part of grace before meals. "Things put in it don't come out clean." That creek's held more names than your mouth has teeth. He told me about a woman that waited 30 years for a miner who never walked out. About a girl who went off with a man who made liquor and never came back down the hollow. About a drowning in a storm where nobody could tell if the water took the person or the person went to the water. "Don't go calling back to anything that calls to you first," he added, and sweetened his coffee with a spoon that had been washed so many times the metal tasted like soap. After that, I started leaving a little earlier each evening, like a fisherman beating the weather. Sometimes it didn't matter. I'd step onto the path and it would be like stepping into a room where somebody was already waiting with their words warmed in their mouth. My name from the brush at my left shoulder, my name under the whispering of the leaves. The strangest part wasn't the fear. Fear's an animal you recognize even when it shows up in a new skin. It was the care in it. Whoever said my name did it softly, not like they wanted to pull me in a hurry, but like they wanted me to understand they'd been patient. One Sunday, I brought Tate because we were 17, and everything we were scared of got easier if we had someone to nudge with an elbow. He talked big on the way down, about a girl at the grocery who chewed ice, and how he thought that meant she needed more salt in her life, and how he could be that. The path opened at the sycamore, and the creek showed its coal-colored run, and it was quiet in the way that has weight. I kept my mouth shut. He tossed a rock at nothing and grinned like he'd done something brave. The voice didn't come. He started to laugh and say, I'd been listening too hard to old men, and that's when it came, late, like it had been trying to find us and had to take the long way around. My name, thin as thread, and the hairs on my arms stepped up like grass in a gust. Tate shut his mouth. He held it that way like he thought a sound might get in. Wind, he said, like an answer instead of a guess. And he took another rock and whipped it into the rhododendron. Leaves shook, but there was a different noise underneath, quick and human, the sound you make when you're still too long and your knee complains and you try to hide it. Tate stared as if his eyes could cut branches. He muttered that he had to piss and went up to the wagon road to do it. When he came back, we left, and he didn't tease me anymore. He didn't come back down there again. If the voice said his name on any night after that, he never told me. The whisper turned up in places it had no business. I'd be in the shed sharpening a knife and hear it behind the stacked firewood. I'd be in the back bedroom where the window rattled, even latched. And in the rattle, there'd be a shape that could have been a breath, that could have been my name. Once, walking the dirt road below our mailbox, I heard it right behind me, close enough that a chill went up under my hat, like somebody had lifted the brim to blow. I wore the brim low after that. It's funny what tricks you teach yourself. Walk with your back to the trunk when you can. Stay where you can see both banks. Listen for the small sounds that tell you if you're listening to a person or to the weather. At some point I decided I was done being the one who stood in the open and waited. I took the long way around the creek, up over the ridge and down the slope where the laurel grows shoulder high and mean. It clawed at my jacket and left a green smell on my skin. On the far bank, I found a narrow path no deer made. Too careful for hooves, bent at the height of a body that spends a lot of time ducked. There was a notch in the rhododendron like a doorway, and behind it a shelf of rock that had been sat on enough to shine. I stood still until I could hear past my own blood. The creek talked to itself. A blue jay said lies to a pine. Then I saw the small things that make a space human. A ring of ash where a fire had lived, the ash scattered by rain, fish bones like white handwriting on dark rock, 3 stones stacked on 3 stones here and there, a habit you keep when you need a ritual because nobody else gives you one, a tobacco tin a little newer than the rest of it wedged under a root. I opened that tin with my pocket knife, the metal squeal loud as a scream in a place that wanted quiet. Inside was a piece of paper folded in fourths, 2 buttons, and a hook rusted into a question mark. The paper held a pencil drawing, our side of the creek, the curve of water, the slouch of the sycamore. The fence posts on the wagon road I'd counted so many times, little squares neat in a line, a box and a triangle for our house. The back window drawn wrong because whoever had drawn it only ever saw the place from a side angle. On the sycamore, the carven scar of my name had been copied in clumsy block letters. I felt it in my throat when I saw that. It meant eyes. It meant time. It meant someone had made a map and put me on it like I was a place they could go to. When I turned the paper over, there were words written down the center, not sentences, just shapes a hand had practiced hard. Apple, knife, door, help, help, help. And then my name at the bottom, repeated until it started looking like a little fence. I put the paper back where I'd found it, slid the tin under the root again, and sat down on the rock without thinking it through. The stone held heat. Somebody else's shape had warmed it before me. Something shifted deep in the rhododendron to my left. Small, human, the weight of it careful. I kept my hands on my thighs and said, "I'm leaving," because I didn't know what else to say. And the worst part was that I meant it as a courtesy, as if I owed the dark my. Story 3. The Tunnel Beneath Coleridge. When I was a boy, growing up at the edge of Coleridge, there was this tunnel we used to dare each other to walk. Not the pretty kind you see in postcards. This was a leftover coal shaft, half caved in, never boarded up properly. The grown folks said the company that dug it was long bankrupt and probably never filed the paperwork to seal it. I don't remember seeing a sign or a chain, just an open mouth in the hillside that breathed cold air year-round, no matter how hot the summer got. We called it the Ridge Hole, like it was a thing that had been there since before the mountain, and in a way, it felt like it had. It stank of rust and damp stone, old rot and something deeper, like wet pennies left in a mason jar too long. You'd pass it on the logging trail and feel something in the back of your knees, a pressure that made you want to walk faster. Still, we all went inside at least once, just enough to say we had. I remember Jason dared me first. Said he'd seen bones in there. Said he'd throw my knife down the tunnel if I didn't go in and touch the timber support about 10 feet from the mouth. It was warped, like a spine, black from water and age, and I remember how quiet it was in there, like the dirt had sucked up all the sound. I did it, ran in, slapped the post, ran back out so fast I nearly twisted my ankle, but I remember feeling like something stayed with me, like I'd picked up a smell on my clothes that didn't belong, or stepped in something invisible. Jason laughed and said I was pale as bread. We never talked about it after. Most of us went once, never twice. But something about it worked on me. I'd find myself looking at it when we passed. It was the way the tunnel didn't feel like a place. It felt like a presence. I didn't go back for years. Not until I was 17 when I started thinking about old things in a different way. The kind of way where you want to prove something to yourself. I had a lantern I used for trapping possum, an old steel thing with a weak flame but reliable. And one night in late August, I took it and walked out past the ridge alone. No one knew I was going. The woods felt wrong, but familiar, like a house you used to live in before someone died in it. I found the tunnel easy enough. The entrance was half swallowed by kudzu now, vines thick as wrists curling down over the lip. I pushed them aside and ducked into the dark. It was colder than I remembered, the kind of cold that doesn't feel like weather. It feels like a memory. The lantern hissed soft in my hand. My boots squelched in a layer of standing water just inside the shaft, and the smell hit me all at once. Rust, wet earth, mold, and something like iron cooked too long in a pan. I kept walking, slow, counting steps. The beam of the lantern carved a yellow eye out of the black, but it didn't reach far. I passed the timber I'd slapped as a kid, past a second one I don't remember seeing. The air changed there, got thick, like something had been waiting just past the point of no return. About 50 yards in, the tunnel narrowed. A section of roof had slumped down, and I had to duck low, careful not to brush the walls. That's when I first felt the whisper. Not heard it, felt it. A low vibration through the soles of my boots, up into my knees, into my teeth. It wasn't windy. It wasn't anything with breath. It threaded through the stone, coming from beneath, behind, all around. At first, it was just a texture in the air. Then it found its shape, a rasp. Not English, not any language I knew, but it carried rhythm, like speech, like prayer. The syllables came dry and dragged, like someone pulling a nail across a slate board slow enough to feel each scratch. I froze. My body wanted to run, but my mind stayed, listening. There was something old in that sound, something that made my skin feel borrowed. I turned around. The lantern sputtered once, went dim, then flared. In the sudden brightness, I saw the tunnel behind me, the place I'd come from, but it looked longer now, wider, like something had stretched it while I was facing forward. The whispers rose behind me, not louder in volume, but in number. They multiplied, overlapping, like voices trying to speak over each other in a narrow hall. Still not words I could understand, but intent pushed through. I wasn't being spoken to, I was being read, like something had opened me up the way you'd unfold a map. I started walking, then running. My boots splashed through water, slipped on stone. The lantern shook in my grip, flame bobbing wild against the dark. The whispering didn't stay behind. It came with me, not following, surrounding, filling the air like smoke. My chest seized with something more than fear, something like guilt, though I didn't know what I was guilty of. I caught the mouth of the tunnel just ahead, a slice of blue night through vines. I ran for it, lungs burning, not daring to look back, though every part of me screamed that something was close, close enough to touch. I broke out into moonlight like a man surfacing from water for too long, fell forward onto my hands in the dirt. My lantern flew from me, skidded against a rock, and went out. The silence outside was wrong, not peace, an absence like the world had paused. When I finally looked back at the tunnel, it was just black again, still. No whisper, no sound. But the feeling didn't leave. That vibration was still in my spine, in my teeth, like the tunnel had laid claim to something inside me. I didn't tell anyone for days, couldn't. It felt too strange to talk about, too intimate. I started dreaming in sound, not images, just stone and breath, and that rasping voice I still couldn't translate. I stopped sleeping. The world went thin. I'd hear it in my own house, in the pipes, in the walls, in the bones of the floorboards when I walked. I asked my mother if we had family who worked the mines. She looked at me strangely and said no, not since her grandfather, and he died before she was born. I asked my uncle, and he frowned, asking why I wanted to know. I didn't tell him. He wouldn't have understood. Not without going in. 2 weeks later, I walked past the tunnel again, told myself I wouldn't stop, but I did. The vines had pulled back more, like something wanted that mouth kept clear. I didn't go in, just stood there, listening, and in the dead air that hung around the shaft, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the world. My own name, pulled slow and hollow, spoken in a rhythm too ancient for the syllables to carry clean. I backed away, and as I did, I saw a faint shape inside the tunnel. Just for a second. Not a person, not a thing. A bend in the dark, like the space had folded inward, like something standing still long enough to distort the air around it. I ran, again. I never went back, but I still hear it sometimes. On gravel roads, in basement corners, in the cold before rain. A voice, not mine, saying things my body understands but my mind refuses. It didn't want me to visit, it wanted me to remember, to carry it, to spread it. And the worst part is, I think I have. Because every now and then, when I speak, I catch myself forming a word I've never learned, from a language no one living remembers. Something deep and wrong that tastes like stone and iron and time. And I always stop before I finish it, because I'm afraid of what I'll say, or who will answer. Story 4. The Porch at Miller's Hollow. That summer, I stayed with my cousin Seth in Miller's Hollow. I learned the kind of quiet that never sits right. Not silence, there's always sound in the woods, but a sort of hush that feels like holding your breath before a scream. Seth's cabin perched up on a leaning ridge, boards sagging, nails working loose from years of wind and wet. It was the kind of place that never dried out, no matter how long the sun stayed up. Even in July it smelled dark. Pine sap, mildew, smoke that lingered in the corners of the wood, even though there hadn't been a fire in years. I was 17 then, sent down for the season while my folks sorted out a mess back home they didn't want to explain. I thought it'd be a break. Turned out to be something else entirely. The cabin sat about 3 miles past the blacktop, where the road crumbled into gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt, and the trees started closing in like a secret. Seth lived alone, didn't say much, worked odd jobs clearing brush or fixing fence posts. His face had that mountain stillness, eyes that flick, mouth that doesn't. The first week passed slowly. We ate cheap stew, played cards in the evening, and killed lanterns around 9. The cicadas came heavy at night, a high, constant buzz that set your teeth on edge. You'd fall asleep feeling like you were inside a wire. The porch, long and slumped on one side, faced the woods. You could sit out there and smell the sap bleeding from the pines and feel the way the ridge never truly stopped moving underneath you. It was maybe 10 days in when I first heard the voices. I'd stepped out after Seth had gone to bed. The lantern in the main room was burning low, so I let it be and walked onto the porch with only the moon and the heat. The night pressed in heavy, the kind of thick where you could almost lean on it. I leaned against the rail, listening to the insects, trying not to think about how far from town we were. And then, under the buzz of the cicadas, quiet but not hidden, I heard them. Voices, not one, more than one. Soft, low, like breath moving through teeth. Not conversation, not an argument, a rhythm to it, almost like prayer. A rise and fall like someone rocking or someone remembering. I didn't move, just stood there, not scared exactly, just hollowed out. The sound didn't come from the woods or the trail, it circled, like the voices were walking around the edge of the porch. Not on the porch, around it. As if the cabin had become the eye of something turning slow. I stepped back inside, locked the door. Seth was snoring on the couch, mouth slack. I thought about waking him, but didn't. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make me sound stupid. By morning, it felt far enough away to forget. But the next night, they came again. Always around the same time, just after the lantern died. I sat on the porch that time, waiting like a fool to prove it was nothing, that it was wind through pine, or animals pushing brush aside. But it wasn't. The voices rose just like before, faint, overlapping, almost melodic. I couldn't make out words, just shape, tone, a rhythm so precise it couldn't be an accident, and that same circling movement like pacing. I like watching. Seth caught me out there the 3rd night. He stepped onto the porch behind me, looked out at the trees without speaking. After a minute, he said, "You hear him too, huh?" His voice was flat, not surprised, not curious. I nodded, He shrugged, lit a cigarette with a match that sparked slowly. "Old miners," he said. "That's what folks say. Disappeared back in the 20s, coal vein caved in. The company pulled out. Buried 'em, maybe. Maybe not." I asked if he believed that. He didn't answer, just said, "They don't come close. Not unless you invite." I wanted to ask what he meant by that, but he turned and went inside. After that, I stopped pretending not to hear them. They came every night. Always the same pattern. Quiet at first, then that whisper prayer circling slowly. The more I listened, the more it changed. Sometimes I thought I heard names, or fragments. "Down here," one said once. Clear enough, I nearly fell from the chair. Another time, "Come look," always gentle, always just out of reach. I tried sleeping in the main room once, next to the door. Thought maybe it'd help, maybe I'd hear less if I were closer, but that night, I dreamt something stood just past the glass, pressed its hand to the window and whispered not with a voice, but with breath. No words, just presence. I woke up with a sweat cold on my chest, and the lantern flickering like someone had just stepped away from it. The chair, an old rocker with one loose slat, started moving by itself. First I thought it was just a breeze, but it didn't rock when I wasn't there. Only when I sat, then stood. Like something wanted to mimic me, or finish what I'd started. One night, I left it rocking on purpose. I stepped inside without watching it stop. When I looked out in the morning, it was still, perfectly still, turned to face the woods. That's when I noticed the smoke, not thick, just the smell, like damp ash, like something that had burned but didn't leave a flame. It clung to the porch, to my clothes. Seth smelled it too. He said nothing. The last week I was there, everything got quieter. The insects died off early. The breeze stopped. The woods themselves felt like they were holding breath. The voices came closer. One night, I heard footsteps. Not in the dirt, on the boards, not loud, just enough weight to make the porch creak near the far corner. I sat, frozen. The chair rocked behind me without touch, and something, a presence, a shift, stood just behind my shoulder. I didn't turn. The whispers rose, overlapping, faster now. Not urgent, just louder, like they wanted to be heard in full. I closed my eyes. I tried to listen. I tried to understand, and for a moment, I did. I felt that it was to be forgotten, left behind, crushed under soil and time and the weight of breath never released. Whatever was speaking hadn't moved on because it hadn't been allowed to. It had been sealed in, buried, not just under earth, but under memory. And in that forgetting, it had turned inward, whispering the same words again and again until it believed them, until it became them. I opened my eyes. The porch was empty. The voices are gone. I didn't sleep that night, didn't speak to Seth the next day. We split wood and made soup and didn't say a thing about the chair that had moved closer to the door on its own. When I left the hollow at summer's end, I didn't tell my folks anything. They wouldn't have believed it anyway. But now, years later, I still hear them when I sit out on porches alone, when the night gets still in that too deep kind of way, when cicadas stop too early and the breeze disappears. I hear the rhythm, the circling, the soft, broken prayer. And sometimes I rock, just to see if anything rocks back. Story 5. The Crossroads That Waited for Me. It was early spring, the year I found myself walking past Harlan, out where the land folds into itself and the old growth blocks out the moonlight even when the sky's clear. I'd driven up that way to check on an old trailer my uncle had left me in his will, a rusted out thing squatting on cinder blocks in a hollow where the power lines hadn't hummed since '96. It wasn't worth much, but I'd been feeling pulled to it, like some unfinished thing had been left there. After a day clearing brush and checking that the door was still locked, I decided to take the long way back, on foot, through the old ridgelines and fire trails I hadn't walked since I was a teenager. It was supposed to be a memory lane kind of thing, but memory can turn on you, out in the woods. About 2 miles in, I came to the crossroads. There's no marker, just a dirt split where the trees gather like old men in secret. The locals call it the Dead Crossroads. It ain't on a map. You won't find it if you're looking, but if you're not, it finds you just fine. The fog had crept in without me noticing, low and thick, curling at my knees. I stopped to get my bearings, figured I'd turn back if it got worse. But when I stood there, trying to decide, the sound came. Not suddenly, not loud, just a whisper rising from all directions like breath caught in branches. Not wind. Wind moves. This didn't. It hung, like it had been waiting to be noticed. It wasn't words, not in any language I knew, but it had shape, cadence, long exhales broken into syllables like a song hummed wrong. My lantern flickered, casting light in a circle that barely pushed against the fog. Shapes moved at the edge of it, shapes that might have been trees or people or neither. I told myself to walk, to keep steady. That's what my grandfather used to say about the woods. Don't ever run unless you know what you're running from. I took the left fork, boots squelching in the soft mud, fog clutching my ankles like it wanted to hold me back. The whisper followed. Not behind me, not ahead. Around, always just far enough to seem like it might not be real. Then I heard her, my mother's voice, plain as day, low and clear behind my left shoulder. "Honey," she said, like she was calling me in for supper. But my mother had been dead for 5 years, buried with a Bible in her hands and cedar at her feet. I didn't turn. I didn't stop. Every instinct in me screamed to look, to see her standing there in the fog. But I kept walking, eyes forward, grip tight on the lantern, heart thudding like it was trying to tear free. She spoke again, closer this time. "It's cold," she said. "Come stand with me." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste iron. The voice didn't change, no distortion, no echo, just her, calm, patient, wrong. The whispering grew louder, layered now, like other voices were joining in, slipping under hers. Some young, some cracked with age, all speaking in that same drawn-out breath. I moved faster, careful not to run, even though every step felt like wading through water. The ground shifted beneath me, roots curling up like hands, mud pulling at my soles. Then something brushed my back. Not forceful, not even enough to stop me, just the suggestion of fingers cool and dry, brushing down my coat like a mother dusting off her child. I nearly screamed, but I didn't stop. I passed an old tree I recognized, split down the center by lightning years ago, the inside hollow like a wound. That meant I was near the gravel road. The whispering hit a peak then, loud enough to feel in my ribs. A pressure more than sound. The fog pulsed around me, swirling like breath against glass, and just as suddenly as it had come, it fell silent. I stumbled onto gravel, sharp underfoot, familiar, real. Behind me the fog lingered at the tree line, thick, still, watching. The lantern burned steady again, and I stood there, breathing like I'd run a mile uphill. I looked back once, only once. The path I'd walked was gone, swallowed clean. No fork, no sign, just trees and mist and silence. I drove home that night and never spoke of it. What would I say? That the woods tried to speak to me in my mother's voice? That something old and hollow lives at that crossroads, waiting for the sound of a name it remembers? I've never walked that trail again. I won't, because I know what waits there isn't trying to hurt you. It wants you to stay, to listen, to believe. And once you do, I don't think it lets you go. Story 6. The Silent Bedroom Above the Store. Back when I was 24 and scraping together work wherever I could, I ended up in Whitesburg for a spell. Found a job helping Mr. Langley run his hardware store, sweeping up, unloading shipments, fixing the register when it jammed. It was quiet work, and it came with a perk. A room upstairs, rent-free. Just had to keep the place locked up at night and make sure the lights were off by closing. The room wasn't much, just a narrow space with slanted floors, one window that looked out over the back alley, and a closet that smelled like old wool and damp wood. I didn't care. After sleeping in my truck for 2 weeks, it felt like a palace. The first week was easy. I got used to the way the pipes moaned when the temperature dropped, and the way footsteps echoed up from the store below, even when I knew no one was there. The building was old, built in the 20s, Langley said. It'd lean in its bones like it wanted to sit down but didn't know how. Some nights I'd fall asleep to the creaks and sighs of it settling, the noises so familiar they faded into the dark like a lullaby until they didn't. It was a Tuesday night when it started. I'd closed up, turned the sign, killed the lights, and climbed the narrow stairs to the room. I lay down in bed with a book and listened to the rain ticking against the window. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A sound from the closet. Not a bang, not scratching, just a whisper, low, fast, like someone muttering just behind the door. I froze, heart climbing up into my throat. I strained to hear, but it stopped as soon as I moved. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind had squeezed through a crack in the wood. Maybe I'd imagined it. The next night, it happened again. This time I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling when the whisper returned. Closer now. Urgent. It slipped out of the dark like breath on glass. I sat up slowly, turned on the lamp, and stared at the closet door. The whisper went silent again like it knew. I got up and opened it, half expecting someone to be standing there crouched under the coats, but it was empty. Just old hangers, a couple mothballed jackets, and the sharp, dry smell of cedar. I left the door open that time, slept with the lamp on. Nothing more happened until Thursday. I came home late that night after a delivery had run long. I hadn't eaten, so I sat at the little table by the window with a sandwich and a jar of pickles. That's when I heard it again, whispers from the closet. Only this time they didn't stop when I moved. They got clearer. I walked toward them, slow, sandwich in hand, trying to make out the words. The voices, shifted in and out of each other, like wind through tall grass. One male, one female. At first I couldn't tell what they were saying, until one sentence rose above the rest. He doesn't know we see him. I dropped the sandwich. I stood, frozen, staring at the closet, which I hadn't shut. The coats hung perfectly still, but the whispering continued, threading the air like a needle. He doesn't know we hear him. Then something else, quieter. He dreams out loud. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the closet with the lamp on, whispering Psalm 23 under my breath, though I hadn't been to church in years. Around 3 a.m., the voices faded, like someone backing down a hallway that wasn't there. When morning came, I packed. Didn't even fold my clothes. Just shoved everything into a duffel and walked downstairs to Mr. Langley, who was restocking a shelf of nails like it was any other day. I told him something strange was happening upstairs, that I'd heard voices. He didn't look at me, just kept sorting my nails. "You're not the first to say so," he said. "The room's always been noisy." I asked what he meant. He shrugged. "People don't stay long." "Why not?" I pressed. He finally looked up at me then, and there was something hollow in his face, like he'd spent years swallowing things he wasn't allowed to say. "Some houses remember," he said. "Some don't forget what they held." That was all he gave me. I left that morning and never went back. The job wasn't worth the nights. And the room, well, I still dream about it sometimes. The closet, the voices, the way the floor slanted just slightly toward that door like it wanted to fall through. Sometimes, late at night when the house creaks just right, I swear I hear that same whisper again. Low, urgent, not speaking to me, but about me. And I wonder if I ever really left, or if part of me stayed behind in the silent room above the store. Story 7. The Call from the Drowned Quarry. The quarry sat just past the edge of town, hidden behind a mess of pine and rock where the earth sloped off like it had given up. Folks said it was over 100 feet deep, an old mining scar left behind when the men pulled the last of the black rock out in the 60s. Water filled it not long after, rain, groundwater, snowmelt, and the locals let it be. No signs, no fences, just quiet. Every kid I knew growing up dared each other to jump from the ledges, especially the tall one we called Devil's Step. A few did, some broke ankles, and 3, they say, never came back up, drowned or something else. That part changes depending on who's telling it. I never went until I was 21, dumb enough to think I was too old for stories, too young to sense when something ain't right. It was early fall, just cold enough to see your breath at dusk. I'd been out walking, clearing my head after a fight with my old man. I wandered further than I meant to and ended up at the quarry without realizing. The trees thinned, and there it was, water black as oil, flat as a mirror. The surface didn't even shiver with wind. It looked like it had never been touched. I stood there a while, just watching. There was a silence to that place I hadn't felt before, like everything nearby was holding its breath. The lantern I carried threw a weak circle of light across the rocks. I stepped closer, the gravel crunching soft under my boots, and that's when I heard it. A voice, low and steady, like someone whispering through cupped hands. Not urgent, not panicked, inviting. It came from across the water, or maybe beneath it. It said my name, just once, drawn out like the end of a prayer. I froze, peering across the surface, but saw nothing. The quarry was still. Then it spoke again, this time clearer, like it had moved closer. It promised warmth, said I wouldn't feel cold, not anymore, that I could rest. The voice was male, calm, familiar in a way I couldn't place. I leaned forward without meaning to, like the sound had caught me on a hook. Then the water rippled, just a single bloom of movement right at the center. No wind, no rock, just a shift, like something huge had stirred beneath the surface. My lantern flickered then, dimmed down to a cold glow before flaring back. I stepped back instinctively, heart starting to thump in my chest. The voice didn't stop. It followed, still whispering, still steady. It said things I didn't want to hear, called out secrets I'd never spoken aloud, things I'd done, things I'd thought about doing. The whisper twined with my memory, got under it, and I started to feel heavy, like I'd been sinking even though I was standing still. I turned and walked, not fast at first, just steady, but the voice kept pace, threading between trees, always just over my shoulder. It didn't yell or beg, it suggested, it was offered. By the time I reached the tree line, I was running. From the ridge I looked back. The quarry was still there again. No ripples, no voice, just black water waiting in the hollow it had made for itself. And me, shaking in the dark. I told myself it was exhaustion. Maybe the cold had gotten to me. But that night, lying awake in my room, I heard water trickling in the pipes though no faucet ran. I heard my name again, soft and slow, like it had followed me through the woods. I haven't been back since, but every so often, When the wind dies and the world goes still, I feel it again, that pull, that whisper promising warmth in a cold world. And I wonder if I leaned in just a little further, what I'd see waiting beneath the surface. Story 8. The Roadside Whispers of Pine Gap. Driving through Pine Gap past midnight wasn't something I ever planned on doing. Folks from around Hazard and Buckhorn always said that stretch of road ran too quiet for comfort. No houses, no gas stations, just 20-odd miles of shoulderless blacktop coiled between old pine forest. The kind of place where the darkness pressed hard against your windows and made your headlights feel useless. I'd driven it a few times before, mostly with someone riding shotgun, and always during the day. But that night, I'd left my buddy's place late, thinking I could shave time by cutting through the gap instead of swinging north like usual. It was nearly 1 when I turned off the highway, tires humming over the faded double yellow line, nothing but radio static and the low thrum of the engine for company. It wasn't long before the reception died altogether. Not just the radio, my cell signal too. I glanced at the bars, then the gas gauge, still half full. Should have been enough to get me through, but about 6 miles in, my dashboard flickered once, then again, and the car sputtered like it had swallowed something wrong. I pulled over, popped the hood out of habit, and stepped out into air that smelled sharp with pine and something else. Old water, maybe. Like mildew left too long in a plastic bucket. Under the hood, everything looked fine. No smoke, no loose hoses. I tapped at the battery cables, jiggled the air filter, all the things I remembered Dad doing. I hadn't even closed it yet when I heard it. A whisper. Low, steady, just loud enough to be a voice. Though I couldn't make out the word. It came from the trees on the right side of the road, maybe 30 feet back where the undergrowth thickened. I froze with one hand still resting on the hood. I told myself it was windy. Pine forests are full of strange acoustics, but then it came again. Same cadence, same not quite language. A syllable too slow to be a bird, too measured to be an animal. I turned toward the tree line, shining my flashlight through the branches. Just trees, tall, tight, unmoving. The beam cut long shadows between trunks, some thicker than others. But no movement, no shapes, no glowing eyes like you'd get with deer. Still, the hair on my arms stood up and I stepped back from the edge of the woods. The whisper came again, closer this time. I didn't hear it travel, it just was closer, like whoever, or whatever, was speaking had covered half the distance without walking. This time the word sounded like stay, but it was so faint I couldn't trust my ears. I spun around, half expecting someone to be behind me, but the road was empty in both directions. No moon that night either, just black overhead, thick as tar. I climbed back in the car, locked the doors out of instinct and tried the ignition. It turned once, twice, then caught with a sick groan like it didn't want to wake. I gave it some gas, wheels twitching on the gravel, and rolled forward about 100 feet before the engine choked and died again. This time, the whisper came from the left side. I didn't open the door, just sat, frozen, keys still in the ignition, flashlight in my lap, and breath fogging the inside of the glass. The whisper grew steadier now, like it wasn't trying to lure me but wear me down. A rhythm forming, like a word repeated in prayer. Not angry, not loud, just certain. I told myself it was just old nerves and too much darkness. That if I waited long enough, a truck would pass, or I'd get cell service back, or I'd wake up from a nap I didn't remember taking. But deep down, I knew that voice had noticed me. Don't pick me, just seen me, and now I was a part of something I didn't understand. Then headlights appeared in the rear view, far off, but bright, a box truck by the look of it. As it drew closer, the whispering faltered, stuttered, then stopped altogether like something slipping back under a door. The moment the light touched the trees, it was gone. I waved the truck down, frantic and pale, and the guy pulled over with a grunt of brakes. I told him my car was acting up and asked if he had a phone I could borrow. He didn't, but he let me ride with him back toward town, left the car behind that night. When I returned the next morning with a tow, the engine turned over like new. The mechanic back in Hazard said there was nothing wrong, not a fuse out of place, no corrosion, no battery drain, just running fine. I don't take Pine Gap after sundown anymore. I don't care if it saves me an hour, because whatever lives in those trees doesn't chase you, don't scream. It waits, patient, whispers just loud enough for your bones to remember. And some nights, when I drive past the edge of that forest, I turn down the radio and listen for it, just to see if it still knows my name.